When we picture a nuclear submarine launching a missile today, we see a weapon erupting vertically from beneath the ocean surface, leaving the sub itself completely hidden. But in the 1950s, the reality of a submarine-launched nuke looked like this. This is the Regulus cruise missile. It was 30 feet long, weighed 10,000 pounds, and looked and functioned basically like a jet airplane. After World War II, the U.S. Navy realized that to survive as a relevant military branch in the atomic age, it needed a reliable way to deliver nuclear weapons. They initially tried putting heavy bombers on massive aircraft carriers, but surface ships are incredibly vulnerable to enemy strikes. Once the massive supercarrier project was canceled, the Navy was forced to look underwater. Curious, slightly incredulous, they had to somehow take an enormous, highly aerodynamic cruise missile and strap it to a submarine, a vessel whose entire design depended on hydrodynamics and staying completely submerged. To pose a credible nuclear threat before actual underwater ballistic missiles existed, the Navy had to temporarily compromise the submarine's greatest tactical advantage, its invisibility. The Navy's initial solution was to heavily convert World War II-era diesel submarines, like the USS Tunney. Looking at this cross-section diagram, you can see how they attached a massive pressurized hangar directly onto the aft deck. This structure had to be perfectly watertight to keep the electronics inside the missile dry, even when the hull was subjected to extreme pressures at crush depth. Because the missile required significant preparation before it could be fired, engineers built a narrow access trunk connecting the sub's interior to the hangar chamber. This allowed the crew to climb up and run diagnostics while the sub was still safely deep underwater. But preparing a weapon inside a pressurized tube is the easy part. Actually deploying it in the open ocean during a combat scenario was another story entirely. Solving the waterproofing problem underwater created a deadly tactical problem the exact second the submarine had to fire. To actually launch the Regulus, the submarine had to break the surface. Once the hangar doors opened, the crew physically climbed out onto the open, wet deck to manually haul the massive weapon onto its launcher. From the moment the submarine surfaced to the moment the jet engine ignited, the crew was exposed for a full 15 minutes. In a hot war scenario, that is a quarter of an hour where the sub is sitting entirely helpless against enemy radar and aircraft. And even after the missile was airborne, the danger wasn't over. The submarine could only dive down to a shallow periscope depth. Because these early missiles lacked internal inertial navigation, they required remote control steering. The crew literally had to remain near the surface to transmit guidance signals to the Regulus in flight, keeping them tethered to the weapon until it hit the target. This meant maintaining a constant deterrent force in the Pacific was a logistical nightmare. To ensure at least 4 missiles were always on station, the Navy had to deploy multiple 2-missile diesel submarines simultaneously. Unlike nuclear subs that could stay submerged indefinitely, these aging diesel engines required fuel. The boats were forced to make highly vulnerable refueling stopovers at remote outposts like Midway Island and Adak, Alaska, just to stay on patrol. For the crews, executing their primary strategic mission required painting a massive target on their own backs. The Navy did attempt to build a second-generation Regulus with its own internal guidance to sever that remote-control tether, but it still required the submarine to surface to launch. What actually rendered the cruise missile obsolete was the arrival of the Submarine-Launched Ballistic Missile, or SLBM. As we see in this diagram, instead of a horizontal surface launch, a ballistic missile takes a vertical trajectory directly through the water. Because the solid-fueled Polaris missile could be fired from the deep, the submarine never had to expose itself to the air, perfectly preserving its stealth and ensuring its survival. As these superior Polaris submarines arrived in the Pacific to take over the deterrent mission, the Navy rapidly drew down the Regulus fleet by 1964. Over a tense 5-year period, a total of just 5 submarines conducted 41 strategic deterrent patrols with the Regulus. It was a clunky, terrifyingly vulnerable stopgap. But the Regulus program successfully proved the viability of sea-based nuclear weapons, serving as the essential stepping stone to the invincible silent service triad of today.